I used to adore Ava with everything I had, hoping she would eventually love me back. I took the blame for her mistakes and shielded her from criticism, playing the part of the neglectful husband for 5 years just to protect her reputation. However, the diary she kept hidden in a wooden box revealed her true heart. She only ever wanted to have children with another man, never with me. Now, I'm actually relieved we do not have kids, because an innocent child would have been caught in the middle of this broken marriage and deeply hurt. It was the 4th of July, which also happened to be my 5th wedding anniversary with my wife, Ava. We had originally planned to spend the holiday weekend vacationing in Aspen. But on the morning we were supposed to leave, Ava frantically packed her bags and told me that her office had called her in for an emergency business trip. I believed her story until late that night when I saw a Facebook post from her first love, Gabriel. In the photo, the two of them were leaning into each other with their fingers tightly locked. They were even wearing matching couples bracelets that stood out clearly in the shot. I forced myself to smile. She had indeed gone to Aspen, but I was not the one by her side. Instead of calling her to demand an explanation, I simply liked the post. A minute later, my phone rang as a panicked Ava called me back. "It's a total misunderstanding. We just ran into each other on my business trip," she stammered. "I swear I will make it up to you next July 4th. I gave a cold laugh and told her it was fine as long as she was having fun. Ava seemed completely bewildered and asked why I was not acting jealous at all. Ava returned home a week later, dragging a massive suitcase through the front door. In the past, I would have rushed to the door to take her bags and set out her slippers for her. This time, I did not even get up from my seat. Ava leaned against the doorframe and looked at me with a deep frown. "James, where are my slippers?" she asked. I used to have them waiting for her every time she walked through the door, but this time I had done nothing at all. Since I remained motionless on the sofa watching television, she had to ask again. I told her they were in the shoe cabinet and that she could find them herself. Ava's frown deepened to my response, but after a moment of hesitation, she walked over to the cabinet to get them. She changed into her slippers and stood before me, pouting as she gestured toward the empty dining table. "I'm hungry," she said. "Could you fix me something to eat?" In the past, I would have jumped up even at midnight to cook her a hot meal if she was hungry. Today, I simply looked away and told her I was busy and that she should order takeout if she was hungry. A look of annoyance flashed across her face, but she sighed and stepped closer to me anyway. Her voice became much softer as she tried to placate me. "Honey, I know that business trip upset you, and I am so sorry," she said. "It won't happen again." She asked for my forgiveness and mentioned she had brought me a gift. My expression remained neutral, and my voice stayed steady as I told her she was overthinking things and that I was not angry. Ava froze, looking at me with total confusion before her brow furrowed once more. She reached into her suitcase and pulled out a crudely wrapped box. When she opened it, she revealed a silk tie and looked at me expectantly. She asked if I liked it, claiming she had picked it out specifically for me. I suddenly recalled a post my frenemy Gabriel had shared on Facebook 3 days ago. He had mentioned a grand opening sale at a luxury mall for the holiday weekend. The promotion offered a free tie with any purchase over $1,000, and it was exactly this blue and green pattern style. Now, Ava was trying to pass it off as a carefully selected gift meant just for me. I kept my face blank to hide my disgust as I took the tie and thanked her calmly. I told her it was a thoughtful gift, which seemed to catch her off guard. "That is all you have to say?" she asked, to which I replied by asking what else she expected to hear. Ava frowned and grabbed my arm, asking if I was still secretly angry with her. She insisted that running into Gabriel had been a total coincidence and that they had only shared a quick meal at the airport. I nodded and repeated that I knew and was not angry. My sudden lack of emotion seemed to make her more anxious than an argument would have. She stared at me with wide, disbelieving eyes, asking why I was not acting jealous this time. I told her there was nothing to be jealous about because I had finally gained some perspective on my frenemy. I stood up and grabbed my jacket to leave, but Ava stepped in front of me to block my path. She demanded to know where I was going and asked about her anniversary gift. A month ago, I had purchased a sapphire bracelet at an auction, and the news had made it into the local social columns where Ava had seen it. I pulled out my phone and transferred $30,000 to her account, telling her I had forgotten to get a gift and she should buy herself whatever she wanted. Ava went silent immediately. Throughout our 5 years of marriage, I had never once failed to put immense effort into her holiday and anniversary gifts. She stood there in shock for several seconds before she grabbed my arm and angrily demanded to know where the sapphire bracelet was. I let out a sharp laugh and pointed at her own wrist. I asked her what bracelet she was talking about, since she and her frenemy were already wearing matching couples jewelry. Ava's face turned bright red as she stammered that it was just a friendly gift from Gabriel. She told me not to overthink it and promised to take it off immediately. After 5 years of living together, I knew every single one of her tells and micro-expressions perfectly. I could see her panic simply by the way she was twisting the fabric of her shirt. I was so emotionally checked out that I did not even want to argue with her anymore. I rubbed my temples, feeling completely drained, and turned my back on her to walk away. For 5 years, I had put Ava's needs before everything else in my life. Realizing how long it had been since I saw my old friends, I decided to book a flight to San Francisco. I needed a break and a chance to catch up with the guys. My best friend, Mario Miller, had a dinner party organized within minutes of my phone call. After we had a few drinks, the whole group started staring at me. They all began teasing me at the same time. They joked that they thought I had forgotten them after getting married, and asked if Ava knew I was in town. I took a sip of my drink and told them they could call me whenever they wanted because I was done walking on eggshells around her. My phone screen kept lighting up with missed calls from Ava. She had called over a dozen times, but I ignored every single one. Ever since Gabriel moved back to the States, Ava had stayed out all night on several occasions. Back then, I was the one frantically calling her just like she was doing now. I used to demand to know why she was unreachable, my voice full of hurt and anger. She would always snap at me and ask if the world was ending, telling me how annoying it was to see my name on her screen. Now, the roles were reversed, and she was the one being a nuisance. My friends and I kept drinking and talking until the early hours of the morning. Just as we were getting ready to leave, Ava suddenly burst into the room, looking frantic. She pulled out a chair and sat down next to me as if nothing was wrong. She snatched the glass out of my hand and told me to stop drinking, reminding me that I had a sensitive stomach. I was momentarily stunned by her presence, as her sudden display of concern felt completely fake. I looked at her with a cold expression and asked what she was doing there. My friends were polite enough to offer her a quick greeting. She smiled at the guys before grabbing my hand and whispering that she had to come find me since I was not answering my messages. I felt a surge of irritation and shoved her hand away. I spoke to her in a voice as cold as ice. I told Ava that I had already made myself clear and that she needed to stop overstepping our boundaries. She stood there speechless, as if she had been slapped. I signaled for my friends to leave and walked right past her without another word. She followed us outside and shouted that she had come all this way to apologize and asked what more I wanted from her. She told me to grow up and be more rational, criticizing me for running away like a child after a small fight. She jumped in a car and followed us all the way back to Mario's place. She kept trying to talk to me during the drive, but I shut her down every time. She looked humiliated and frustrated, begging me to stop making a scene. She told me I had drunk enough and that it was time to go home. She claimed she knew I was just jealous, but insisted that nothing was going on with Gabriel. She told me not to hurt myself over it, but I just laughed and told her she was delusional. I explained that I was drinking because I was happy to be with my friends and that it had nothing to do with her. I pushed her away and walked into the house with Mario. I ignored her completely as she pounded on the front door. For the first time in years, I slept through the night in total peace. Mario knocked on my door the next morning to tell me that Ava was back. I got dressed and went downstairs to find her sitting at the dining table. She looked absolutely miserable and refused to say a word. I knew she was waiting for me to apologize because in the past, I would have done anything to make her smile again. This time, I didn't even give her a second glance. I walked right out of the house and hailed a cab on the corner. I ran into Ava again at the airport terminal. She marched up to me with her voice trembling with suppressed rage. She reminded me that we were married and asked if I really felt the need to hide from her over such a trivial issue. I kept my eyes on my laptop screen as I told her she was being paranoid and that I was not hiding from anyone. At that exact moment, her phone began to ring. I could clearly hear Gabriel's voice coming through the speaker. He asked where she was and reminded her about a business dinner that night. He told her that everything depended on her showing up to close the deal. Ever since Gabriel had moved back to Boston 3 years ago, Ava had been helping him behind my back. She had used me as an excuse 1,000 times, and I used to pretend I didn't notice. But seeing the genuine smile on her face while she talked to him made my chest tighten with pain. She had never used such a gentle, loving tone with me in all the years we were together. Whenever she spoke to me, she sounded like she was addressing a business associate. I had asked her in the past to be a little more affectionate, but she would always snap at me. She told me that work was stressful enough and that I should stop being so demanding. I looked down at my phone and sent a quick message to my assistant. I told him to notify all our business partners that Ava and I were officially filing for divorce. When Ava finished her call and turned back to me, the warmth in her expression vanished instantly. She told me in a demanding voice that she had urgent business to take care of in Boston. Since all the flights were booked, she ordered me to give her my ticket and wait for the next one. When I didn't answer, she repeated the demand as if I were her subordinate. I told her flatly that I hadn't even bought a ticket back to Boston. Ava exploded in anger, accusing me of putting on a dramatic performance just to get her attention. She called me childish and said I was only at the airport to prove how jealous I was. She turned on her heel and stormed off, leaving me to watch her disappear into the busy terminal. A wave of bitterness washed over me. I realized that no matter where we were, one phone call from Gabriel was all it took for her to abandon me. It reminded me of a Facebook post Gabriel made on New Year's Eve about how true love meant always choosing that person first. I hadn't booked a flight to Boston because I was actually heading to Spain. Since taking over the Ford Group, I had been focused on expanding our operations into the European grocery market. I had already scouted a perfect location for our first international warehouse. Mario Miller had put me in touch with a mentor who was an old friend of his father's. He told me that just one dinner with this man would teach me more than a year in business school. The mentor and I hit it off immediately and spent the entire dinner discussing industry strategy. He helped me resolve several major issues I was facing with the expansion. He seemed impressed with my vision and offered me a 6-month residency at his corporate headquarters in Spain. He promised that within half a year, I would have all the tools needed to dominate the grocery industry. It was the perfect chance to establish myself, and I had absolutely no reason to say no. As I was getting ready to drop the mentor off at his hotel, my phone started blowing up with calls from Ava. I declined her calls repeatedly until my mentor noticed and finally spoke up. He asked if I needed to let my wife know about the move to Spain. He must have seen the affectionate contact name I still had for Ava in my phone. I shook my head and told him that she was effectively my ex-wife and that the divorce was already in motion. After I dropped him off, I finally decided to return her call. The second she picked up, she started screaming questions at me. She demanded to know why our business partners were suddenly refusing to speak with anyone but me. She complained that she had been a face of the company for years and didn't understand what had changed. She screamed about how important her deal for that night was and accused me of sabotaging her. I couldn't help but laugh at her arrogant tone and told her that I didn't care about her deal. I could hear Gabriel's voice in the background, begging her for help and telling her he was counting on her. Ava's voice instantly turned sweet as she promised him that she would handle everything. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel in a fit of rage. My chest felt tight with a sickening sense of betrayal and hatred. She constantly claimed her relationship with her frenemy was innocent, yet she used a tone with him that she never offered to me. I wondered when she had started wearing that fake mask of affection for everyone but her own husband. All she ever gave me were cold commands and scripted responses. I gave her a short, cold refusal and hung up the iMessage before turning my phone off entirely. I spent the next 2 days in Spain finalizing my plans. My mentor and I spent hours going over the logistics and fine-tuning every detail of the expansion. I completed my paperwork and found an apartment close to the new office. I had my assistant send out a formal notice to our major partners regarding my move overseas. I also took the time to personally thank them for their support over the last 5 years. There had been no sign of Ava at the house for days since I returned. Everything was strangely peaceful. I took the opportunity to change the security codes on all the doors to the condo. After a day of rest, my phone started ringing again with calls from our business associates. They insisted on throwing me a farewell dinner, and I felt obligated to attend. When I arrived at the restaurant, the door to the private room was cracked open. I could hear Gabriel's voice inside, laughing and talking loudly with our investors. My heart sank as I realized that Ava and her frenemy had somehow managed to get themselves invited to my private send-off. I hesitated for a moment before finally pushing the door open and walking inside. Gabriel was sitting at the head of the table, leaning comfortably against Ava. Ava looked up at me and casually told me to find a seat, acting as if I were just another guest at the party. She immediately brought up the drama from our last encounter in San Francisco. She suggested that since everyone was present, we should clear the air and put everything on the table. All the investors turned to look at me, waiting for a reaction. My expression was stony and silent, which made everyone else in the room visibly uncomfortable. Gabriel looked absolutely smug as he gave me a knowing smirk. I ignored him and took a seat far away from them. Throughout the dinner, Gabriel acted like he owned the place, constantly raising his glass to offer toasts. He bragged loudly about the future of the company and the deals he was planning to sign. It was obvious he thought he had already won. Meanwhile, my phone was buzzing incessantly with messages from Ava. She sent several iMessages telling me she had an announcement to make. She asked me to keep up appearances for her and promised we could talk once we got home. She told me that since she and Gabriel were being honest about their relationship now, I should just let it go. I scrolled down further to find another message waiting for me. She told me that Gabriel would likely be too drunk to drive and that she would have to take him home after the party. I just raised an eyebrow and sent back a one-word reply, telling her I didn't care. Once the drinks had been flowing for a while, Ava stood up next to Gabriel to address the room. She announced to everyone that Gabriel would be taking over as the new head of the Ford Group operations in Boston. She told the investors that all future deals would go through him and asked for their continued support. One of our lead partners looked at me with a confused expression. He asked what on earth she was talking about, since the Ford Group had already decided to pull out of the Boston market. He mentioned that they were already in the process of finalizing the paperwork to divest from the local branch. Pulling out of Boston? James, what is he saying? Ava's face turned ghostly white. She turned to me for an explanation, and I simply gave her a cold nod of confirmation. I told her that I was moving the Ford Group's entire focus to our international operations. Ava stood there, completely paralyzed, and asked if I was really moving the entire business out of the country. She asked what would happen to her, but I didn't answer. I had originally intended to get through this dinner quietly and leave without making a scene. I never expected Ava would be bold enough to try and stage a coup with Gabriel at my own farewell dinner. She angrily demanded to know why she hadn't been informed about the company pulling out of the city. The partner looked between us, sounding confused. He asked if Mr. Ford hadn't told her that the entire reason for the dinner was to say goodbye to me. He added that future partnerships were uncertain at best. Ava jumped to her feet and stormed over to me, demanding an explanation for my behavior. She asked if I was actually serious about leaving the country. I just gave her a blank stare before finishing my drink in one go. I thanked the room for their support over the years and told them that our paths might cross again in the future. I turned on my heel and prepared to leave the restaurant. Ava's eyes were rimmed with red as she grabbed my arm and screamed for me to stop. She demanded to know when I had made this decision and why she was the last person to find out. Her voice was shaking with a mixture of rage and shock. I shoved her hand away and told her that she knew now, and that was all that mattered. My voice was as cold and flat as ice. Seeing that I was done talking, Ava suddenly grabbed a full bottle of red wine from the table. She swung it at my head before I could react. The glass shattered against my skull with a sickening crack that echoed through the room. Blood began to pour down my face immediately as I collapsed onto the floor. Mario Miller rushed to my side to shield me from any further harm. Seeing me covered in blood, Ava's anger vanished and was replaced by pure panic. She started screaming for someone to call 911 and get an ambulance. My vision started to fade into darkness while the room filled with the sound of panicked voices. My eyelids felt incredibly heavy and I could no longer keep them open. I drifted in and out of consciousness until we reached the hospital, where the doctor called for a family member to sign the consent forms. I reached out and weakly tugged on Mario's sleeve, telling him that I wanted him to sign the papers instead of her. Ava, who was hysterical by this point, pushed her way to my bedside. She cried out that she was my wife and asked why I was still trying to push her away at a time like this. I made a weak gesture with my hand before I responded. I told her that I wasn't being difficult. I just already considered her my ex-wife. As I finally lost consciousness, I could hear her sobbing in the background. She kept saying that she would never agree to a divorce and that she wouldn't let me leave. I woke up in a sterile hospital room with an M4 line running into my arm. The bright white walls made my head throb with pain. Ava was asleep in a chair next to the bed, still holding onto my hand. I immediately remembered the look on her face when she had attacked me with a bottle the night before. The sound of her steady breathing made me shudder with a sudden chill. She slowly opened her eyes and immediately began to speak. She asked how I was feeling and if I was in any pain. Her sudden shift back to being a caring wife only made me feel more defensive and suspicious. She was the reason I was lying in a hospital bed, yet she was acting as if she were completely blameless. I yanked my hand away from hers and turned my head toward the window, refusing to acknowledge her. To my surprise, she didn't get angry. She just gave me a soft smile. She reached out and cupped my face with her hands, speaking to me in a soothing whisper. She told me to stop being angry and claimed that she had just lost control of her emotions in the heat of the moment. I let out a disgusted laugh and shoved her hands away once more. She probably didn't even realize it, but I could still smell the heavy scent of woody cologne clinging to her skin. It was the exact brand that Gabriel always wore, and the smell made my stomach turn. Ava noticed the look of pure revulsion in my eyes and sighed. She asked what it would take for me to go back to the way I used to be. She complained that she had only gone on a business trip and couldn't believe I was making such a big deal out of it. I used to think that as a married couple, we should always protect each other's dignity. But after Ava had spent years trampling over my self-respect, I had finally reached my breaking point. I was done trying to save a marriage that had already died. Her phone buzzed twice on the nightstand, and she glanced quickly at the screen. She immediately turned the phone over to hide the display and sat back down on the edge of my bed. She took my hand again, her voice suddenly becoming sugary and soft. She asked if I would call our partners and tell them to work with Gabriel on his new project. She suggested we could discuss my move to Spain later, but insisted that I help her frenemy out in the meantime. She told me we shouldn't let our personal issues affect our professional relationships. I couldn't believe that she still thought I was just throwing a temper tantrum after everything that had happened. I frowned and told her that I had no intention of making that call. I told her that if she wanted to help Gabriel, she would have to find another way to do it. Before Ava could start another argument, my phone rang. It was my mentor from Spain calling to check on my progress with the move. I informed him that I had been involved in an accident and was injured, which meant I had to delay my arrival by a week. He told me to focus on my recovery and hung up. Ava stared at me in absolute shock, asking if I had really already finalized all the arrangements and booked my flight. Her voice was trembling, and I could hear a faint note of panic in her tone. I gave her a brief, cold confirmation as I looked away. When she heard my response, all the color drained from her face. She reminded me that we were married and asked if I had forgotten the vows we made to each other. She reminded me of my promise to always make major decisions together. She accused me of being selfish for planning such a huge move without even consulting her first. I forced a bitter smile onto my face and pointed out that she had been so busy with Gabriel that I never had a chance to speak with her. Her words stung because I remembered the promises we made when we first got engaged. We had vowed to trust one another and to always be partners in every sense of the word. Everything changed once Gabriel moved back to town and Ava started staying out all night. She would get incredibly defensive whenever I tried to ask her where she had been. Every time I tried to talk to her, she would pull a face and start scolding me. She told me she wasn't a child and asked why she had to report her every move to me. She accused me of being controlling just for wanting to know if she was safe. Eventually, I had to resort to checking her frenemy's Instagram just to figure out where my own wife was. I was disgusted that she now had the nerve to bring up our old wedding vows when she had broken them 1,000 times already. Just as I finished speaking, a delivery man walked into the room carrying a massive bouquet of sunflowers. They were my favorite flowers in the world. Ava looked visibly uncomfortable because she knew she wasn't the one who had sent them. It was ironic because Ava was usually the first person to send flowers whenever a friend or family member was in the hospital. I had scanned the room the moment I woke up and realized there wasn't a single thing from her. She had never once thought to show me that kind of basic courtesy. Ava gave a forced laugh and commented on how thoughtful Mario was. My chest tightened and my eyes began to sting with tears. It was pathetic that the woman I had spent years adoring couldn't even match the simple kindness of one of my friends. The irony was almost too much to bear. I had my assistant bring the divorce papers to the hospital so I could finalize everything before leaving for Spain. When I handed them to Ava, she didn't even bother to read them. She ripped the documents into tiny pieces right in front of me. She threw the scraps of paper in my face and hissed at me through gritted teeth. She told me that I was being ridiculous and that my jealousy was getting out of hand. She reminded me that she had access to all of the company's trade secrets. She threatened me by telling me to think twice before leaving her. She asked if our 5 years of marriage meant nothing and told me to take some time to calm down. She insisted that I reach out to her only when I was ready to be rational. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room. I watched her leave and let out a long, exhausted sigh. Looking back, I honestly don't know what I was thinking. I wonder why I was so obsessed with her for all those years. I first met Ava during our freshman year of college. She was wearing a simple white sundress and looked lost as she stood by the campus gates. I was walking past when she reached out and grabbed my arm. She asked me very shyly if I could help her because the wheel on her suitcase had snapped off. The moment she smiled at me, I was completely captivated by the deep dimples in her cheeks. I wasn't usually the type of guy to stop and help strangers, especially since I was running late for a rehearsal at the auditorium. However, I didn't hesitate to pick up her bags and carry them all the way to her dorm. She gave me a small gift from her hometown as a thank you and asked for my number. We both joined the student government, and we eventually became inseparable. We went to dinner, saw movies, and spent our nights studying together in the library. I noticed back then that she seemed to be living on a very tight budget, often only eating small portions of vegetables. She started working several part-time jobs off campus just a few weeks into the semester. I finally asked her if everything was okay with her family's finances. She was very hesitant to talk about her personal life at first. It wasn't long before she came to me in tears. She explained that her father needed an emergency operation and asked to borrow some money. I didn't even hesitate before transferring the funds to her account. I eventually gave her a credit card on my account so she wouldn't have to worry about her daily expenses. She was reluctant to use it at first, but as her father's health continued to decline, she ended up needing more financial help from me. Eventually, she grew completely accustomed to my financial support and used my cards for everything without a second thought. I realize now that by spoiling her for so long, I had enabled her behavior. She had come to believe that I would always be there to clean up her messes no matter what she did. It was obvious that Ava was going to fight the divorce, but I was running out of time. That evening, I got a call from the building manager at my condo. He told me that Ava was in the lobby causing a scene because her key no longer worked, and she had even called a locksmith to the building. I had already instructed security to bar her from the premises a few days prior. I could hear her screaming in the background of the phone call. She was yelling that she was a resident and demanding to know why she wasn't allowed to change the locks. Her voice was so shrill and aggressive that it gave me an instant migraine. I decided to head over there one last time to settle the matter of the divorce once and for all. By the time I arrived at the condo, the police were already there because I had called them myself. As soon as she saw me, Ava grabbed my arm and began frantically explaining the situation to the officers. She told them that we were just having a small marital spat and that I had changed the codes without telling her. She claimed she didn't want to bother me while I was recovering in the hospital, which is why she had called the locksmith. I interrupted her with a look of pure annoyance and told the officers that we were in the middle of a divorce. I stated clearly that she had no right to be on the property or to attempt to change the locks. Ava immediately exploded the moment the words left my mouth. She screamed that the condo was marital property and that she owned half of it. She asked me how I could possibly kick her out with one sentence. She reminded me of my engagement promise that everything I owned would belong to her as well. I shook my head and told her that she needed to understand something very basic. I explained that I had only been willing to share everything with her because I loved her. However, no one can keep loving someone who betrays them over and over again. Ava's eyes filled with tears the moment I finished speaking. She grabbed my collar and shouted that she didn't care about the divorce and demanded I let her in to get her things. I had originally planned to have her come back at a later date to pack. Given how much of a scene she was making, I finally relented and let her into the apartment. The second she got inside, she ran into the bedroom and locked the door behind her. I was beyond frustrated by her behavior. I walked over and hammered on the door to tell her she had exactly 3 hours to pack. I reminded her that I needed to get back to the hospital. I sat on the sofa and waited in silence for her to finish. Nearly an hour later, the doorbell rang. I hauled myself up and went to see who was there. My frenemy Gabriel was standing in the hallway, holding a clear plastic bag. Inside was a pair of pink pajamas with rabbit ears on the hood. He tried to peer past me into the apartment and asked if Ava was home. I noticed a faint red mark on the side of his neck that looked suspiciously like a hickey. I was so disgusted that I didn't even want to speak to him. I tried to slam the door, but he blocked it with his hand. I asked him what he wanted while trying to keep my temper in check. Gabriel just smirked and held out the bag, telling me that Ava had left her pajamas in his suitcase. He claimed he was just being a good friend by dropping them off on his way home. Even though I was done with Ava, seeing her intimate clothing coming from another man's suitcase still felt like a punch to the gut. I felt an indescribable sense of discomfort as I stared at the bag. I just pointed toward the bedroom and told him she was in there if he wanted to go talk to her. The smug look on his face faltered for a second, and I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. He tried to regain his composure and started to tell me that I had the wrong idea about him and Ava. I didn't let him finish the sentence and shoved him aside. I told him that I was heading back to the hospital and that he should take Ava with him. As I was about to walk out, Ava came running out of the bedroom and asked how I could be so incredibly heartless. She insisted that nothing was happening with Gabriel and asked why I was being so difficult. She told me that we were going to have a long talk the moment I was officially discharged from the hospital. I slammed the door shut and didn't say another word to either of them. I climbed into a waiting taxi and gave the driver the hospital's address. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, feeling completely drained of energy. I spent another 3 days in the hospital recovering from my injury. To my surprise, Ava started showing up every morning after driving 40 minutes just to see me. She would stay by my side all day and wouldn't leave until late at night. I told her to go home, but she flatly refused to leave my room. She claimed she wanted to prove to me how much she cared. She said she didn't want our marriage to end and begged me to reconsider my decision to move the company to Spain. I told her she was acting crazy and that she wasn't listening to anything I had to say. She ignored my protests and kept coming back every single day anyway. I eventually asked the hospital staff to bar her from visiting my room. The nurses told me that since she wasn't causing a public disturbance, the hospital rules allowed her to visit as my legal spouse. I resorted to hiring 2 private security guards to stand outside my door to keep her out. She was so desperate that she called the police and showed them our marriage certificate to gain access to my room. The officers told us to stop wasting their time with domestic disputes and left. I was so exhausted by her constant harassment that I finally gave up and just ignored her while I focused on getting better. Ava mistakenly took my silence as a sign that I was starting to forgive her. She went out of her way to be the perfect wife, trying to prove how much she had changed. I stayed in the hospital until the 6th day before finally checking myself out to catch my flight to Spain. I checked out on the evening of my 6th day at the hospital. Ava had told me she would be late that day because of a work emergency. I spent the afternoon frantically packing my things and didn't even notice that she was blowing up my phone. I didn't realize how late it had gotten until she started pounding on my front door. I opened the door and immediately pushed 3 large suitcases out into the hallway toward her. Ava looked at the bags in total shock and asked me what I was doing. I told her that I had packed up every single thing she owned and that it was time for her to leave. She looked panicked and stammered as she tried to find the words to speak. She asked if I had actually gone through her private closet. I gave her a cold smile and told her that I had even included the wooden box she kept hidden in the back. In 5 years of marriage, I had never once invaded her privacy by going into her closet until today. I was surprised she had left such a revealing item in such an obvious spot. Inside the box was a yellow diary filled with her teenage obsession for her frenemy, Gabriel. Every single page was a testament to how deeply she had loved him since she was 18. I found a carefully preserved photo of Gabriel tucked between the pages of the journal. When Ava saw the look on my face, she started babbling excuses immediately. She swore that she hadn't opened that box in years and tried to explain her relationship with her frenemy again. I told her I was done listening. I didn't want to hear another word about him or her feelings for him. I pushed her and the 3 suitcases out into the hall and prepared to close the door. Ava spent the entire night sitting in the hallway while I stood by my window watching the moonlight hit the floor. I stayed awake all night thinking about the past. I stayed awake all night thinking about exactly when our relationship had started to fall apart. I realized it might have started with a simple watch that both Gabriel and I had wanted at the same time. Ava had told me she managed to buy a limited edition Maya watch for me as a surprise. But when she got back from her trip, she suddenly claimed that it had sold out before she could get it. When I tried to ask her about it, she got defensive and told me she had just been mistaken. I couldn't help but wonder how that exact same watch ended up on her frenemy's wrist a few weeks later. At Gabriel's grand opening party, everyone was talking about how impressive it was that he had managed to find such a rare timepiece. Ava clearly thought I was too stupid to connect the dots. I had already hired a private investigator the moment I decided to leave her. Even though I knew what he would find, seeing the physical evidence of her betrayal still hurt more than I expected. In that moment, I felt a wave of relief that we never had any children together. For 5 years, our friends and family had constantly asked us when we were going to start a family. Ava would always tell them that she was too busy with work and hadn't even considered it yet. I would always play along and take the blame, telling everyone that I was the one who wasn't ready to be a father. She was the one who was truly responsible, as she had consistently refused to even discuss having a baby with me. Her diary made it very clear that she only ever wanted to have children with one man. I finally accepted that I was never the person she intended to spend her life with. Before I left for the airport, I had security escort Ava off the property after she spent the whole night in the building. Our eyes met through the car window as I drove past the gatehouse. I realized in that moment that the woman who used to control my every emotion no longer had any power over me. She looked so tired and worn out, but I felt absolutely no sympathy for her. It was a strange realization that I had finally stopped loving her completely. Before my flight took off, I decided to leave her with one final gift. I had my assistant hand over the full dossier I had compiled on Gabriel. The documents detailed how her frenemy had been involved with 2 other women during his time in Boston. He had spent years telling Ava that his marriage ended because his ex-wife was unfaithful. In reality, he was the one who had been cheating the entire time. He had been using Ava as a pawn from the very beginning of their reunion. He manipulated her into funding his new business and doing all the hard work for him. She had spent her time and money securing deals for him, completely unaware that she was being played. I had already met with Gabriel's ex-wife via a video call to discuss his behavior. She had provided me with all the evidence I needed to take him down. Her only request was that I make sure Gabriel faced the consequences of his actions once and for all. I realized that his secrets were finally catching up with him. Gabriel's business records were a complete mess, so I reported his financial discrepancies to the IRS. I also filed a civil suit against him to recover all the money that Ava had embezzled from our company to fund his projects. I didn't turn my phone back on until I landed in Spain after my long flight. My phone was flooded with unread iMessages from Ava, but I didn't bother to respond to a single one. The game was finally over for both of them. She had likely seen the evidence and received the court summons by the time I landed. Since she refused to sign the papers voluntarily, I decided to let a judge handle the divorce. I started my new position at my mentor's firm and quickly settled into my new life. A month later, I had to fly back to Boston for the final court hearing. Ava looked like a shell of her former self as she sat at the defendant's table with hollow eyes and pale skin. In just 30 days, the stress had completely transformed her appearance. She tried to call out to me the moment I walked into the courtroom, her eyes lighting up with a desperate hope. I just looked at her with such coldness that the words died in her throat. My lack of emotion seemed to shock her into silence. Because I had provided overwhelming evidence of her infidelity and financial misconduct, the judge ruled that Ava would receive nothing in the settlement. Her frenemy had already been arrested for tax evasion, and he had tried to blame her for all of his illegal business practices. Ava collapsed into her chair as the judge finished reading the verdict. I took one final look at her before turning to walk out of the courtroom. Her face was ashen, but she still tried to beg me for mercy as I walked past. She asked me if I could drop the financial claim against her, reminding me that she didn't have any money left to pay me back. It was pathetic to see such a proud woman begging for scraps, but I didn't feel a single bit of pity for her. I remembered how she had acted during our first year of marriage when she was at a luxury spa. She had demanded a public apology and compensation from a woman who had accidentally stepped on her new shoes. She had called me that day, sounding absolutely outraged and insulted. I had actually bought the entire spa just to appease her and show her that I always had her back. I had spoiled her so much back then that people used to tell me I was being completely irrational. I didn't care what anyone thought because I was so blinded by my love for her. I used to think she was perfect in every way. I would have given her anything her heart desired back then. If she had asked for the moon, I would have found a way to build her a bridge to reach it. Now, her desperate pleas for help didn't even interest me enough to look back. She kept begging for my help, but I cut her off before she could finish her sentence. I told her that the money she owed me was nothing compared to the emotional damage she had inflicted on me for years. Her voice was shaking as she tried to defend her actions. She admitted she had made a terrible mistake, but insisted that she really did love me. She begged me to believe that her feelings for me were genuine. I found it hilarious that she had the nerve to use the word love after everything she had done. She was the one who had kept another man in her heart throughout our entire marriage before finally betraying me. She only claimed to love me now because she was broke and facing a massive legal bill. I realized that I would never be able to trust a single word that came out of her mouth again. I couldn't even imagine what other lies she was capable of telling. I felt a sense of finality as I sighed and walked out of the courthouse. Once I reached the sidewalk, I looked up at the clear blue sky and took a deep breath. I realized that the heavy weight on my chest had finally lifted. My 5-year marriage was finally, truly over. That night, after I landed back in Spain, Mario called me on FaceTime and asked if I had any regrets. I sat in my new apartment and thought about the question for a moment. I knew he was talking about the Ford Group and my decision to shut down our Boston headquarters. My decision had been a shock to everyone in the industry and felt like a bomb going off. Everyone thought I was running away because of the divorce, but they were wrong. I didn't leave because of Ava. I had grown out of making impulsive decisions based on love a long time ago. My real goal was to take my parents' legacy and turn it into something truly global. 6 months later, I held a grand opening for our new international headquarters in Spain. It was a proud moment for me and the entire team. I spotted Ava standing at the very back of the crowd during the ceremony. She hadn't been able to pay back a single cent of what she owed me over the last 6 months. I didn't press her for the money because I knew she was struggling to find work. I figured that some small payments were better than nothing at all. Our financial arrangement meant we still had to maintain some level of contact through our lawyers. I felt a slight sense of sadness every time I saw an iMessage notification for one of her small transfers. I realized that life always places people in your path who force you to grow and move on to better things. I didn't bother to go over and say hello to her after the ribbon-cutting ceremony was finished. I just watched her from a distance for a moment. My mentor's daughter was standing by my side throughout the entire event. She had been my constant companion as I adjusted to my new life and the culture here in Spain. She made me feel at home in a way I never had before. She was always there to encourage me and tell me to be brave whenever I felt like giving up. On the nights when I drank too much, she would always tell me the same thing. She told me that I was a person who deserved to be loved. She helped me realize my own worth and helped me move past the pain of my divorce. I had completely closed myself off after my marriage to Ava ended and thought I would be alone forever. I never expected to find happiness again, but then she came along and brought so much joy back into my life. I reached out and took her hand before dropping to one knee in front of the entire crowd. I pulled a diamond ring from my pocket and looked in her eyes. That ring was something I had planned for a very long time. I had gone out of my way to commission it from an indie designer Ava followed, because I knew how much she loved their work. Everything started about a month ago when we had that long talk. I had given Ava my word, and I fully intended to keep it. I told her that on the day of the grand opening for my new firm in New York City, I would be ready. I promised her that today would be the day James Miller finally gave her the definitive answer she deserved about our future. I refused to break my promise because I couldn't bear the thought of losing a woman who truly put me first. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded and whispered that she would marry me. At the back of the crowd, I saw Ava's eyes welling up with tears as she watched us. I was aware she had been stalking my Facebook profile for months, but I had absolutely nothing left to say to her. My focus now is simply on building a stable and bright future for myself. As the crowd erupted into applause, I pulled my new fiancée into a tight embrace. I leaned in and whispered how thankful I was that she had walked into my life. At that exact moment, Ava turned around and hurried away, wiping the tears from her face as she retreated. I didn't even feel the need to say a final goodbye to her this time. My only wish for the future is that our paths never cross again for as long as I live. Never try to find your self-worth in the eyes of someone who doesn't love you. Walking away from a person who drains your soul isn't a loss. It is an act of survival. Once you clear out the wrong people, you finally make space for the right one to arrive. When you truly begin to love yourself, the rest of the world will follow suit.